The port of Long Beach stretched endlessly into the Pacific darkness, its massive container cranes rising like sleeping giants against the star-filled sky. At 2:40 a.m. on July 12th, 2021, the harbor held that peculiar silence that comes only in the deep hours of night. The gentle lapping of water against steel hulls, the distant hum of generators, and the occasional creak of metal cooling in the ocean breeze. Dock Patrol Officer Luis Moreno walked alone along Cargo Line 7, his footsteps echoing softly on the concrete pier. At 38, Luis moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 10 years patrolling these same docks, someone who knew every container, every crane operator, and every shadow where trouble might hide. His radio crackled with routine chatter from other patrol units scattered across the port's vast expanse. But Luis's sector remained peaceful. Unit 7 to dispatch, he spoke into his radio, his voice calm and professional. Routine check complete on Pier 9. All clear. Moving to final inspection on Line 7. It was the last radio call Luis Moreno would ever make as a dock patrol officer. Within the next hour, he would execute one of the most audacious thefts in port security history and vanish so completely that federal investigators would spend years searching for any trace of his existence. The massive cargo containers stacked around him represented the global economy in its most tangible form. Electronics from Asia, textiles from Central America, automotive parts from Mexico. But Luis knew that some containers held cargo far more valuable and dangerous than legitimate commerce. After a decade of night patrols, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify which containers received special handling, which longshoremen asked no questions, and which shipments moved through the port without appearing on official manifests. Luis Moreno had always been what supervisors called a quiet professional. Born in San Pedro to a family with deep roots in the maritime industry, he understood the rhythms of port life from childhood. His father had worked as a crane operator for 30 years, teaching Luis that the docks operated on trust, routine, and the understanding that some things were better left unobserved. After serving 6 years in the Coast Guard, including tours that exposed him to international drug interdiction operations, Luis returned to civilian life with skills that made him perfect for port security work. He possessed the military bearing that impressed supervisors, the maritime knowledge that earned respect from longshoremen, and most importantly, the discretion that allowed him to work night shifts without creating complications for management. His personnel file read like a supervisor's dream: 10 years of unblemished service, never late, never complained, and never involved in the politics or personality conflicts that plagued many security operations. Luis volunteered for overtime shifts, worked holidays without complaint, and possessed what his evaluations described as exceptional situational awareness and professional judgment. What those evaluations couldn't capture was Luis's methodical intelligence and patient observation skills. Over a decade of night patrols, he had unconsciously cataloged patterns that revealed the port's hidden economy. Certain containers from specific origins received expedited processing regardless of their declared contents. Particular crane operators seemed to have lighter workloads when certain ships arrived. Most tellingly, some cargo moved through the port during overnight hours with minimal documentation and no customs inspection. Luis lived alone in a modest apartment overlooking the harbor, a Spartan space that reflected his Coast Guard background and solitary nature. His social life consisted mainly of occasional beers with fellow veterans and weekly phone calls with his elderly mother who lived in a retirement community in Arizona. He had never married, explaining to curious colleagues that his schedule and the demands of port security work made relationships difficult to maintain. But beneath his quiet exterior, Luis had been conducting what he privately thought of as operational reconnaissance, studying the sophisticated smuggling networks that use the Port of Long Beach as a gateway for moving both drugs and money between Mexico and the United States. His Coast Guard experience had provided him with extensive knowledge about cartel operations, and his nightly patrols had revealed how these organizations exploited legitimate maritime commerce to transport criminal proceeds. The Sinaloa cartel had been using the Port of Long Beach as a critical component of their money laundering infrastructure for over 3 years. The operation was elegant in its simplicity. Dirty cash from drug sales across the American West was packed into specially modified shipping containers and transported back to Mexico, disguised as routine commercial cargo. The containers were labeled with innocuous descriptions like automotive parts, industrial equipment, or construction materials, but contained millions of dollars in shrink-wrapped currency. The system worked because it exploited the massive volume of legitimate trade flowing through the port daily. With over 8,000 containers processed every day, customs officials couldn't inspect more than a small percentage of shipments. The cartel had invested substantial resources in identifying which containers would avoid inspection, which routes provided the safest passage, and which port personnel could be trusted to ignore unusual activity. Container B3771 had arrived on the cargo ship Esperanza Verde 3 days earlier, officially listed as containing replacement parts for heavy construction equipment destined for a company in Guadalajara. The paperwork was perfect. Proper bills of lading, customs declarations, and shipping manifests that would satisfy any routine inspection. But Luis knew from months of observation that containers from this particular shipping line followed patterns that suggested criminal rather than commercial purposes. The container sat in a section of the port designated for expedited processing, marked with colored tags that ensured minimal handling and quick transfer to outbound trucks. Luis had noticed that these specially marked containers always arrived during overnight hours and were collected by drivers who showed no interest in inspecting their cargo, behavior that suggested they knew exactly what they were transporting. Inside container B3771, packed with the precision of a bank vault, sat exactly $10 million in cash, representing 3 months of cartel drug profits from operations across California, Nevada, and Arizona. The money was organized in vacuum-sealed packages, each containing $50,000 in mixed denominations, arranged to match the size and weight distribution of actual machinery parts. The packaging was sophisticated enough to defeat casual inspection while facilitating quick loading and transport. Luis had been studying this particular money transportation route for 6 months, documenting arrival schedules, pickup procedures, and most importantly, the security vulnerabilities that might allow someone with his access and knowledge to intercept a shipment. His plan had been developing gradually, shaped by his understanding of both maritime security and cartel operations. The theft began at 2:55 a.m. when Luis approached container B3771 during what appeared to be a routine security inspection. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, ensuring that every aspect of his plan would appear normal to casual observation while achieving his criminal objectives. The first critical element was eliminating surveillance. Luis had filed a maintenance request earlier that evening, reporting malfunctioning cameras in the area around container B3771. The request was routine enough to avoid suspicion, but ensured that his activities would occur in a blind spot that couldn't be monitored remotely. Port security cameras frequently malfunction due to salt air and harsh weather conditions, making his maintenance request appear completely normal. When a forklift operator approached the area to begin moving containers for morning loading, Luis waved him away with the authority of someone whose orders couldn't be questioned. "Security review in progress," he explained, showing his badge and clipboard. "Port Authority wants this area clear until I complete my inspection." The operator shrugged and moved to a different section of the dock, leaving Luis alone with container B3771. Using his master key, a privilege earned through 10 years of trusted service, Luis opened the container and confirmed what he had suspected for months. Instead of machinery parts, he found neat stacks of vacuum-sealed packages arranged with mathematical precision. The cash was organized by denomination and bundled in a way that suggested professional money laundering operations rather than simple smuggling. Working with practiced efficiency, Luis loaded the money into smaller cargo bags that he had prepared for this purpose. The bags were designed to look like routine maintenance equipment that wouldn't attract attention if anyone observed him moving them around the dock. He replaced the money with carefully prepared decoy packages filled with sand and wrapped to match the original contents, ensuring that casual inspection would reveal nothing suspicious. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. By 3:16 a.m., Luis was captured on a perimeter camera walking to his personal vehicle dressed in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. The timestamp would later become crucial evidence for federal investigators trying to establish the exact timing of the theft. Luis had parked his car in a section of the employee lot that wasn't monitored by security cameras, another detail that suggested extensive advanced planning rather than impulsive criminal behavior. But by the time investigators located his vehicle, it had been abandoned at a bus station in downtown Los Angeles with no indication of Luis's subsequent destination or transportation method. At 6 a.m., a scheduled cartel pickup crew arrived to collect container B 3771 for transport to Mexico. The crew consisted of 3 men with false identification and a truck registered to a shell company that existed solely to facilitate money laundering operations. They had been making similar pickups monthly for over 2 years without incident, confident in their security procedures and the reliability of their port contacts. The discovery of the theft triggered immediate panic within the cartel's operational hierarchy. When the crew opened the container at their safe house and found sand-filled packages instead of $10 million in drug proceeds, they understood that their supposedly secure system had been completely compromised by someone with inside knowledge and professional capabilities. No official theft report was filed because the cartel couldn't involve law enforcement in recovering stolen criminal proceeds. But within hours, a DEA agent embedded in port intelligence operations received a whispered tip from an informant. "You lost a crate, $10 million. Gone." The tip was deliberately vague but sufficient to trigger federal interest in what would become one of the most complex investigations in port security history. FBI Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez assumed control of the case within 24 hours, recognizing immediately that the theft involved sophisticated inside knowledge and professional execution. The timing, method, and complete absence of witnesses suggested military or law enforcement training combined with extensive familiarity with port operations. This was an opportunistic crime, Agent Rodriguez explained during the initial task force briefing. Someone had been planning this operation for months, studying security procedures and waiting for the perfect opportunity. "We're dealing with a subject who understood both maritime security and cartel operations well enough to exploit vulnerabilities that most people couldn't even identify." The investigation team immediately swept the dock area where the theft had occurred, but Luis had vanished as completely as the money he had stolen. His apartment showed no signs of hasty departure, rent was paid through the end of the month, utilities remained connected, and his few possessions were arranged normally. But closer inspection revealed that all personal documents, photographs, and anything that might provide investigative leads had been removed. Luis's bank accounts remained untouched, showing no unusual activity before or after the theft. His cell phone had been powered off immediately after leaving the port and was never reactivated. Most concerning for investigators, his passport remained at his apartment, suggesting either that he possessed false documentation or had found a way to leave the country without using conventional transportation methods. Homeland Security expanded the investigation to include all major transportation hubs within a 500-mile radius, coordinating with customs officials, border patrol agents, and international law enforcement agencies. But Luis had anticipated such measures and had apparently prepared countermeasures that left no traceable evidence of his departure route or current location. The cartel's response was swift and characteristically brutal, reflecting their understanding that the theft represented a direct challenge to their authority and operational security. Within 48 hours, 2 warehouse clerks with tangential connections to the port operation were found dead in separate locations, both showing signs of torture designed to extract information about the missing money. The first victim, Roberto Fuentes, was discovered in his car in a Long Beach parking garage, shot execution style after what appeared to be extensive interrogation. Fuentes had worked near Luis's patrol zone and had occasionally interacted with him during shift changes, making him a target for cartel investigators seeking information about the theft. The second victim, Maria Santos, was found in her apartment with evidence of prolonged torture before her death. Santos had worked as a shipping clerk for a freight company that handled legitimate cargo, but had been suspected by cartel security of maintaining too much awareness of their operations. Her death served both as punishment for perceived security breaches and as a warning to other port workers about the consequences of betraying cartel interests. A cartel message was discovered scrawled on the warehouse wall in Spanish: "Traitors rot below the tide." The message was intended to communicate that the organization considered Luis's theft an act of betrayal that would be met with lethal retaliation, while also serving as intimidation for anyone who might consider providing information to law enforcement. The killings created additional complications for the FBI investigation by eliminating potential witnesses and sources of information about Luis's activities. More importantly, they demonstrated that the cartel was conducting its own parallel investigation, using methods that law enforcement couldn't employ, creating a race between federal agents and criminal enforcers to locate Luis first. Luis Moreno, Dock Patrol Officer, last seen July 12, 2021. $10 million still missing. Cartel threats ongoing. FBI reward, $150,000.